All right, welcome back to Innovia Life Conversations. Today I've got Orlando Andrews with us, and Orlando is a director of business development and outreach. And I've known Orlando for quite some time, with as we've worked with other organizations and things. And I'm super grateful to have him as part of our team. And so thank you not only for your time today, Orlando, but also just in general for all your contributions.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
All right. Well, we're keeping this really light and free flowing. So, but first of all, I'd love to hear more about your background and your experience, not only in the space in general, but how did you get to this point?
So I would say I have been interested in any kind of thing like community-wise that would help people all my life. But before it was always in like more like arts and arts education and community like organizations like symphonies, ballets, theaters, things of that nature, because arts like the arts was moving out of the schools, and I thought that was the good fight. And if you could like support the arts organization, then people would actually have more like ability to do more arts education and things of that nature.
Mhm.
And so the way that I did that is I actually ran call centers for arts organizations, which were theaters, ballets, symphonies, and things of that nature. And I did that for years. And what I would find is that a lot of my staff, actually the best ones, to be honest with you, had addictions, or they were struggling with some sort of addiction, or they would come in, you know, the truth of it, in an arts organization, you don't pay very much. So like the people who are willing to work, I guess sometimes at those levels, it's a part-time job a lot of times, were coming in, and a lot of them, I've had people that were schizophrenic, and schizophrenic to the point where they actually had an episode while at work. I've had people who couldn't maintain on the job because they were drinking too much, or they had an actual like problem. And so I had a lot of experiences realizing that people were having issues in that space. And so this is well before I even planned on being in this space to work. So did see it those problems. So then, full disclosure, I've always been kind of a partier myself, and never really thought anything about having a problem because I was functional, I had really great jobs. But then it came down to the point where I got to an age where I thought, well, this is probably a good time to stop. And I couldn't stop. Like it wasn't like an everyday thing. It wasn't a like out of bounds to the point of like I couldn't keep a job, or like what people think of someone who's struggling with a substance abuse disorder. Like I was very
Mhm.
functional, like not having an issue, other than the fact that I noticed even when I tried to say I'm not going to do this anymore, around a week or two later, it's like I'm upset, I'm celebrating, or like I need to get out, I need to blow off some steam. Whatever the case, it would always end up being, okay, wait, I thought I wasn't doing this anymore, but I was still doing it. So I
Mhm.
found myself in a 12-step program, kind of pretty early on, around early 2000s. And at that time, I saw the issues that we have in 12-step programs. We don't want to go into that too much, but there was definitely some cycles going on, where people, the 12 steps. For me, I ended up in a cult. Let's just put it that way. I won't. And this is in Atlanta, because I was in Atlanta at the time, going through, and it was they've been disbanded now, but this is the first time I tried to get sober. All right. I didn't think of myself as having an addiction problem because I wasn't like the people that were coming through. I was very functional. I had gotten a promotion at the time. I was going to be moving to California. And so I decided that, hey, I got this under control now. And someone in the program came up to me and said, "You don't think you're an alcoholic, do you?" And I'm like, "Well, of course not." No. And so he's like, "Well, I think you should go and try some controlled drinking." And I'm like, "That is a great idea." I'm with you on that. Plus, everybody knew me as the partier. Like that was my reputation, going out to opening night events, going out to like fundraisers, lots of different things. So my going away party was filled with just everything. And so and it was literally like people saying, you could have one more, like start over when you get to California. And so I was like, okay. And so what people don't realize a lot of times is there's a lot of underlying things that go on in a substance abuse situation. So one of the main reasons, and I didn't know this until I decided to stop, that I didn't want to be sober, is that there's a lot of other, I don't know if people talk about ACE scores now a lot, which is adverse childhood experiences. And there are things that start coming up when you remove whatever your coping mechanism is. And if you had talked to me, I had convinced myself my childhood was great. I had the best childhood, which is also a coping mechanism, but I was very uncomfortable not using or drinking or going out to have a drink or eat wine with dinner or just the normal stuff that I would do. And so anyway, 6 years later, I ended up having to come back to AA. Long story short, but the underlying stuff is what people don't realize is the issue with why people can't stay sober. And that cycle, when it comes to support groups, when you're struggling with mental health, behavioral health, adverse childhood experiences, or anything, the only thing you have is AA, NA, pretty much, or one of the A's, anonymous programs, but they don't really address all of the things or the myriad of things that are going on. So you watch people who are really trying to get sober and really doing the program. I mean, they're working it, and they're relapsing at the fourth step because of the fact that they're focused on the addiction and not so much the behavioral health or mental health that's underlying it. And so what I've learned since I've been working in this industry is that when you have a co-occurring issue, you have to work on them at the same time. Because if you focus on one, it kind of has an inverse relationship because it exacerbates the other one, because your coping mechanism for your underlying issue is the addiction or the drinking or the using. And so you don't have another coping mechanism. So the idea is if you just focus on the underlying issue, it makes you use more. If you remove your coping situation or issue or coping mechanism, and then you focus on the addiction itself, then your other is not being addressed and it starts to get bigger, and then you go back to using your coping mechanism to kind of mitigate it. So that's the cycle that tends to happen a lot in AA or in those 12-step programs. And you also see people that are 5 years and 6 years sober that are committing suicide. They're sober, they're doing the program, they're sponsoring people, they're doing everything they need to do, but they're still not able to cope. So I guess you should ask me a question or two, right? I'm just going off on just soliloquy here. So.
No, that's good. That's the whole point is see where this goes. I mean, you bring up a lot of good issues, obviously, and your experience in working with facilities and things like that, and where some of the parts where we're different and how we, for example, can address some of those things is, we're not treating, we're not diagnosing, we're not prescribing, but there's that other thing of after people complete treatment, then what? And when we're looking at the system as a whole, yes, there are some specific types of support groups like you mentioned or that kind of thing, but then what? And so I think taking a look at the treatment system as a whole, that's part of where I think that we fit in, and I want to get your input on that. Is what did you see working with a lot of facilities about when people completed, even if they completed their next step down, their IOP, their intensive outpatient program, or whatever was their next step after completing treatment, then what? Their life doesn't stop.
Right. So that's true. So a lot of times we're all the treatment industry is very much tied to insurance and insurance payouts and the way the insurance works. And so when I was 4 years sober, the miracle of the program, I ended up in a treatment center working in admissions. And I really was sold on the idea that they were better than just going through AA, because they at least had some clinical stuff they addressed. There was this ability to, maybe I thought, get you further than just working the tediousness of the 12 steps and going to meetings. But over the 8 years that I was in the industry, I learned of a statistic that really, really kind of bothered me. And it's that 70% of people going to an inpatient 30-day program aren't sober 6 months later. And this was done in like one of my treatment centers, did a white paper on the industry as a whole. And so, you know, that some of these programs cost 30,000, 60,000, you know, that 90 and 90 concept of how that comes from AA. That like the longer you're in the, like that's the number. So treatment centers started using it. That if you do 90 days in a treatment center, or if you do 30 days inpatient, then you do like 3 weeks of PHP, and then you do like 5 weeks of IOP, that makes that 90 and 90. And so they're two different concepts. They're not the same thing. So like PHPs and IOPs actually have no statistics out there for like their effectiveness whatsoever. I really believe that they were created just because of insurances, because everybody's so tied to insurances. And there was a point in 2017 or so where insurances stopped paying inpatient as a full program. They would, or PHP in an inpatient setting, if they were still inpatient. So people had to move them out of the inpatient to actually get paid. And so then all these PHPs started popping up so they could just bill them for PHP and get paid as soon as they go and drop them down to IOP. So with that said, discharge planners in treatment centers are always trying to get people to go to IOP or PHP. Most people are done after 30 days. They're not trying to go to PHP or IOP. Sometimes it's insurance. They can't afford the insurance to get in. Their insurance won't cover IOP or PHP. And then there are people that have to go back to work. You know, people just don't have the time to devote to like when they're IOPs or PHP. And then there's the people that just don't have anything in their area. So what's ending up happening is they just go to AA if they can go to AA, or if they can go to NA, as much as they can, which usually isn't. Most people aren't trying to do it too much. So the difference between us is that we are taking that space where they can do more and address more than just the addiction in like a 12-step program, which is AA, even though they can do that. But there's all these other places that, like, you have people who come into treatment centers with eating disorders. When they leave, they have no support anywhere. There's, you know, they have Overeaters Anonymous, but if you have like bulimia or some other anorexia, there's no support groups for that. So we have those support groups where you have like an eating disorder coach or an eating disorder support group. But they can also address anxiety or depression, which is usually underlying their addiction as well. You know, because we're not treating or we're not diagnosing, it's a support group. And I think a lot of people, it's the social model of recovery, which is what AA was all about, is like creating community and creating a space where you can talk about things. And with AA and NA, it's drug and alcohol specific. But with Innovia, we actually have this ability to talk about all types of different things in a community building space. So you've got your veterans who can talk about things together. You've got people with anxiety, people with eating disorders, people with parenting issues, people who have grief and trauma, things of that nature that aren't really addressed yet in this space. That's really needed. Everybody is still so focused on what insurances will cover and what insurances won't. And then after that, you got therapists who take forever to get into. If you can get in with a therapist, that's great, but then you're paying, you know, $165 for 1 hour. You know, what happens that entire month when you're still dealing with the issue, but you have to wait to talk to your therapist, and you can afford $165. Well, some people can afford $165 a week if they have the ability to see you that often. But there is this major gap in space of affordability and accessibility to programs that are going to support healing or helping you in this space. And the other thing that supports groups do as well is that they allow you to bridge that gap until you get to your therapist, or bridge that gap until, like, even if you're in IOP, what if something comes up that they're not talking about? You can bridge that gap with a support group. So
yeah, great points. You know, and I certainly have my own opinions and experiences with insurance companies and things like that. But there's a reason why we specifically wanted to avoid that. You know, because I'll just touch on one. because people at insurance companies don't actually know what's going to help someone. That's the really the root of it. And we're trying to bring, like you said, help right there that's affordable and accessible, and as accessible as possible. And not only that, but some of the things that you mentioned too, like there's other things that we're expanding into, wellness related type things too, relationships, how to be able to just deal with general stress in your life too, that people experience on a daily basis, whether it's coming from a relationship or a child or work or finances or whatever. There's stress points in life also, so people can be attending the same group at different points in their lives with different things, but the same principles still apply on how to address some of those feelings and responses internally. And like that's why I wanted to highlight all the people that we have so far and that we're going to continue adding. Of the things that they do absolutely amaze me, and I take advantage of going to their groups and talking to them as well. Like selfishly, I really, I always come away with something more, and I'm super appreciative of that.
No, I've done the same. I actually have done the same. So the concept for me is I'm a person in long-term recovery, and like in January I have 13 years. So we always talk about when people are coming out of like treatment, or when they need to go like to like IOP or PHP, but then there are so many emergencies and issues that come up between that time and 5 years and 6 years and 13 years, and there's nothing for people like in my space. Like we can go back to AA, but you're not there anymore. Alcohol is not really the issue. You're having life issues and emotional sobriety. And so there's Adult Children of Alcoholics, ACA, which addresses some things, but then not all of them. So there's people like us that like just self-care, and like, or people in this industry that need self-care and like to look at things that also need these support groups. But we're so focused, and it's because of insurance, I believe, that we're so focused on the stabilization piece of it, and everything is being built and created for the stabilization piece. But for the general health or the general wellness space, we don't have a whole lot or accessibility. And then as you're talking about insurances, they make you have a diagnosis, or you have to have a diagnosis of some, you were telling me this actually, thank you, that they have to have a diagnosis to be able to use that. So there's like this stigma that comes that like it's going to follow you for the rest of your life, that you're going to be diagnosed a borderline personality person, or bipolar 1, or just so that you can use your insurance to pay for your therapist or pay for the program that you're trying to get into. You can never undo that. And a lot of people don't want to be labeled with a psychological or mental health issue, and that's where support groups come in. Plus digital support groups, you have anonymity, so you don't necessarily have to talk to people in your community and share your business in the community, because you have a wider range of anonymity that a lot of people are looking for, which is also the reason a lot of people don't go to their AA groups or their local AA groups, because even though they're anonymous, or they're supposed to be anonymous, your little community, everybody knows everybody and all their business, so they're not really that anonymous. So
yeah, it's true. I mean, good point. You can, like, for example, when people jump on through the app and they jump on one of our groups, you can use a screen name if you want. You don't even have to use like your full name, that kind of thing. So it does allow for that. Somebody recently brought up, the trepidation of joining a group. Like, what's it like to join a group that you haven't been a part of yet, or suddenly being online and now there's people there, and then you're having a conversation with them, or you're listening, or you're participating in some way, and that the gain is always going to be as high or as strong or better than the risk that you take to go. If you're going, like, you're showing up, you're being present, you're overcoming that fear or that anxiety to join a group, not sure who's going to be there, what it's going to be about, or whatever, and then doing so, and the connection that's developed as a result, that with this other person, the humanity aspect of it is, I mean, it's overwhelming to the point where that's one of the reasons why I continue to jump on as well, and how I love when unexpected people join and you learn something else new about yourself as a result of their participation that you never even thought was going to happen. And I
Right.
think that's sort of the serendipitous aspect of some of the groups as well.
So I find that, I feel that most everybody, like I swear that like people should actually all learn the 12 steps, like in school, or understand the value of what that support group looks like, because you see that in like an AA meeting or an NA meeting where like you walk in and you don't know what's coming up or what someone's going to say, but they share what you need, or you learn something because of something somebody else says and who's going to be there, at that time. Though there is a level of anxiety that comes to walking into, like, for me anyway, walking into
Mhm.
a room filled with people and then being open enough to share
Yeah.
in that space. It's a lot to overcome, especially the first few times. And so I literally had gotten out of the habit for years of even going to like an AA or NA meeting or any meetings, ACA included. And so that was the beautiful thing about there was not too many beautiful things about the pandemic, but the Zoom thing, the ability to actually start to join groups and do groups through Zoom. And that's how I started working the ACA program again. Is like got invited to a local group here that was spanning between California, Florida, and Tennessee. And it was like people in the music industry. And so we were able to like come together every Wednesday during that time. And we saw these new ways of connecting and
Mhm.
actually, not having to jump in a car and drive to a group, like I could just go up to upstairs and turn on my computer. And that's how I started working ACA. That's also how I did full disclosure, ACA is intense if nobody's done this. So there's a lot of, you can get sober and still have a lot of emotional anxiety and stuff that you're, and getting into this industry and working with people every day, trying to get them into places and helping them with their behavioral health and addiction spaces. And you need a lot, but you kind of put yourself on the back burner. So when I was walking back into ACA, in order to get through those steps, which is all about emotional sobriety and your childhood and family dysfunction, and actually being able to just look at it. I'm really good at, boxes and putting things in boxes and putting things away for later, and like never really wanting to look at it. So I did some internal family systems as well over
Mhm.
Zoom, and it worked just as well, if not, I mean, just as well as in person. I never did it in person, but to me, it seemed to work just as well in person. So there were all these new ways of using this platform for wellness, and that actually worked to me better because it fits my personality better than me jumping in a car and driving to a group, or driving somewhere I can literally just come on, turn on, turn on the computer and be there. But there's something brilliant because people show up, and then you get different people coming in, and you can get connected all over the country, people coming in like that's not in your local community. It's like, so it's really, there's a spirituality to it just naturally, which is what the 12-step groups are all about. But it's just a beautiful community building thing that's an even bigger way to build community, which is why I love the Innovia idea, and the platform, because it takes the best of like just a support group. There's no, you don't have to have a diagnosis, you don't have to have anything. You just come in and talk about whatever and see where it goes, with anybody, or anybody can bring in a concept and see where it goes. And it's like you hear what you need, you can say what you need, and that it's not going to go anywhere else, because these are all, they don't know anybody,
Yeah.
so they're not going to know anybody. So
Right. And
yeah.
there's others too. So sometimes people are sometimes like people. I think people get support in different ways too. Like looking at some of the educational content or experiential stuff. If you're wanting to incorporate some physical aspects, some mind body yoga related things, those type things too. That there's other ways of helping to address some of those things that aren't always verbalized.
Right.
Sometimes an experience or a learning about something as well.
Well, you
And
don't
it's
have to
true. Yeah.
you don't have to share, like for years I
Right.
went to AA and didn't share. Like I literally, because the anxiety was way too high for me to really, so I learned to sit there and listen to what
Uh,
people were saying, and learned a lot from listening to what people were saying. But I got a lot out of that, and then I would talk or connect to people offline outside of the group, And like, we would hash out things. I mean, and this is another way to, work with the space is you can meet people in the group that share something that you appreciate, and you can connect to them offline, and actually talk to them one-on-one. So there's all kinds of ways of making the program your program that you
Yeah.
don't have to like share. If you don't want to share, you can just listen. There's, like you said, there's educational content. I hear yoga hurts, but some yoga hurts, but I'm going to try
Oh,
it. It's all
oh,
because
yeah.
it's powerful, so.
I think only if you're, I think only if we're not doing it correctly, or if we're um, doing something a little more advanced than what we should be doing. That's probably more the thing. If it's a little more advanced than what we're supposed to. I can't do. Well, I won't even go there. But yeah, I mean, and we have even like stretch and strength type stuff too. Like stretching is such a therapeutic thing too. But there's so many, and as we go, we're going to continue adding wider and wider offerings of what does a slice of humanity deal with on a given week, and how can we help support them in their lives, and that's where we're continuing to go and build. Is it may be something totally different. You may have chronic pain one week, you may have a loss of a loved one the next week, you may have a divorce next year, or like there's so many things that are just life, and knowing that there's a place where you can find something to help you through that thing, or to help improve something. You're looking to get a promotion, how do you improve your work related skills, like so many different things. And I think that's part of what makes this special. Granted, I'm sharing like that's what is special to me, but I built this honestly or the concept came from what I would look for help, and looking at all the different times in my life of what are things that I've dealt with, and then all the relationships that I've had with people, friends, family, work, etc., and things they've had, and how can we create something that is going to become the most inclusive group possible. How could it be the most inclusive group possible, and how can we offer something that's going to help everybody? And that's where we're going.
Yeah, and that's why I joined. Joined
Yeah.
because that space, I was so tired of being in that emergency space. And where do I help? How do people like me, or I talked to yeah, this is not no HIPAA. I talked to a person today that was like a family that was working with somebody trying to get them in treatment, and so they asked me about the program, and I was like, yes, that'll be good for that person when they're coming or getting ready to get out of treatment, they like, and actually have something that they can look at and focus on their space. But then they tell me about his mother who was falling apart because he had relapsed and she couldn't find him and didn't know what was going on. And I was like, well, she can actually come in and get some as well and do some groups and talk to people that she needs. And then the mother and father don't get along because they're divorced, and they don't know how to co-parent. He can come on and actually work in one of the parenting groups and talk about the issues that they're having with communication. And so there's literally something for everybody, and not just you're trying to prevent a mental health emergency or
Right.
an emergency. It doesn't always have to be after the emergency. It could be before it happens. It's about prevention as well as maintenance of health, as well as stabilization. So it could be
Yeah.
any of those spaces, and so that's what I love about it. So I think you're brilliant.
No. I think our people are brilliant. That's why, like, that's why you guys are all here. Is that the focus is on that, because that's you guys are helping to facilitate all the change. So I really, really, really appreciate your time. Again, not only today, this conversation, but for everything that you do for the space as a whole. For those people who don't know, Orlando helps people no matter what. I'm not saying that this isn't like a 1-800 call Orlando thing, but I know that there's a lot of people that reach out to him for various things, and and that he cares. So that's why we're so lucky to have him as part of our team. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. So I forgot to mention that I have a television show called Recovery Matters that we're going to actually be trying to get out a little bit more. So if you ever want to have somebody on there to highlight, any of the people, I'll actually do that as well. And I'm going to get my certification for coaching abuse and addiction pretty soon. So, you might actually be able to see me on Innovia in one of the groups pretty soon. So I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool, man. Well, listen, this is going to be available for people certainly on our YouTube channel, but then also at innoviabh.com and innovia.life. And we'll continue our Innovia Life conversations.
Yay. Well, that was cool. Thank you, man.